So the biggest question mark going into the offseason for the Chicago Bulls is, what are they going to do with Lauri Markkanen? There have been a host of rumors, speculation, sign and trade scenarios that have been thrown out around by fans and the media, and although I don't think a lot of the rumors are accurate, especially when we should know by now that this front office isn't the type to let their plans leak out to the public. And generally, they like to pull surprising moves that most people don't see coming, like when they hired Billy Donovan when he wasn't even mentioned among the top candidates for coach, or they selected Patrick Williams relatively out of nowhere in the NBA draft, and then of course the major trade moves that they made at the deadline. So I'm not going to sit here and talk about all of the rumors going on around Lauri Markkanen and his impending free agency, but rather I'm going to discuss, in my view, what are the Bulls' most ideal scenarios and how they can approach Lauri Markkanen's free agency this summer and the options that are the most realistic. So what's going on, everyone? You are listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Guys, if you missed my last video from yesterday, I discussed how the NBA should be ashamed of themselves for the way in which they have handled the situation with LeBron James and him violating the NBA's health and safety protocol. So feel free to check that out in case you missed it. As I mentioned in that video, I will occasionally come out with other NBA content during the offseason, well, for the Bulls offseason anyway, while the playoffs are still happening. And I had asked you guys for your feedback in if you would like to see occasional non-Bulls related NBA content. I'll likely always tie it back to the Bulls in some way, but in any event, I got some great feedback from you guys in the comments, so really appreciate that. And every now and then you'll see content from me on other NBA topics, at least while we're still in the playoffs. Even though, you know, the Bulls aren't in it, it is still an exciting time for NBA fans. But anyway, I just wanted to briefly mention that. And with that, let's talk about Lauri Markkanen. Now, if you caught my video on the Chicago Bulls season awards, where I also talked about my biggest surprise player and biggest disappointment player, well, then you had seen that I view Lauri Markkanen as my biggest disappointment for the Bulls in this season, which was for a number of reasons. And I won't go into detail on that because it's in that video since I covered it there. But it's mainly due to the fact that I had very high expectations of Markkanen going into this season. So although he still performed better than some of the other guys on the team, Denzel Valentine, I just expected more from Lauri Markkanen. So that's why I felt that he had a very disappointing season. Now, I know some say, you know, that can be blamed on the Bulls and their coaching staff not developing him properly. Some of it is due to injuries, and that's true. But the fact of the matter is Markkanen has regressed even further than he did last season after having such a promising start to the beginning of his NBA career. So I know I've said this a lot before, but for those who are not aware, Lauri Markkanen is set to be a restricted free agent once free agency opens this summer, meaning he is a free agent in the sense that teams will have the ability to make him offers and the Bulls have the right to match any offers he receives in order to retain him. The Bulls could simply also make him an offer if they're looking to re-sign him as well. Now, there is also the possibility of a sign-in trade where they would match any offer he receives and then trade him, presumably with the team that made the offer. That way the Bulls can match and actually be able to get something for him in return, rather than just letting him walk in free agency for nothing, which is still a possibility. So let's talk about, you know, these scenarios. And what I want to start with is actually the option that the Bulls have in re-signing Markkanen, which I think is unlikely, but not out of the realm of possibility. Now, despite Markkanen having a disappointing season, in my view anyway, I do still believe that Markkanen has potential to be a solid player in this league. I mean, the guy is only 24 years old. He actually just turned 24 yesterday, I believe. Has a very unique skill set in that he's a stretch forward big man who, mind you, had the best shooting efficiency of his career this season. So I don't think the NBA as a whole can really write off Lauri as a bust. I do think that given the right situation, the environment, he can become the player that we once always thought that he could be. And I'm not ruling it out entirely that that could still be with the Bulls for him to realize that potential. I just don't think it's likely at this point. I mean, after the Bulls traded for Vucevic, it was hard to continue putting Lauri in the starting lineup alongside a guy like Nikola Vucevic because of his lack of defense. You really need a strong defensive forward to pair him next to Vuce to maximize the starting lineup's potential. And by moving Lauri to the bench, you really are not giving him the opportunity to maximize that potential in him that we once saw. But be that as it may, let's say the Bulls are going to commit to Lauri and they're going to try to make it work with him on the roster despite his lack of defensive ability. So in this first scenario, I'm saying that the Bulls will re-sign Lauri Markkanen to a 3-year, $33 million deal with a team option on the last year of his contract. Now, I know most of you are probably thinking, Lauri would never go for this. You're talking $11 million a year when it was reported he was looking for $20 million a year this past offseason. Well, Lauri had a down year. Whether you want to blame him, the injuries, or the coaching staff, the fact of the matter is he had a poor season. And I personally don't think Lauri Markkanen, based on his play, is worth more than $11 million max. In fact, I think that's even a bit of an overpay, but a lot of players get overpaid in this league compared to their level of production. Just look at a guy like Davis Bertans. Now, the problem with this scenario is, despite me thinking that Lauri isn't worth that kind of money for the Bulls to pay him any more than that, he's likely going to be getting better offers from other teams, because there are going to be teams out there who are in need of a stretch four, a young stretch four, who are in desperate need of offense and maybe aren't as concerned on the defensive end. And if Markkanen does get offered more than $11 million a year, not only do I not think the Bulls should match, but Markkanen is going to take that. He's not just going to say, that's okay, I'll take less to remain with the team that drafted me. That just doesn't happen. But either way, in this option, I think this enables the Bulls to hold on to Lauri Markkanen for a little while longer, given the fact that he's still young, as I mentioned, and I do still think he has potential. It gives you an added offensive weapon should the unfortunate thing happen to one of your young stars, and at that price point, and also the flexibility of that team option in the final year, it gives you the flexibility in terms of your cap space going into free agency this summer and beyond. Now, another scenario or option that the Bulls will have with Lauri Markkanen is a sign and trade, and I'll go over a few options where I could see this working. Now, there have been some reports and rumors recently that Markkanen wants to sign with the Dallas Mavericks. This has not been quoted by Lauri himself directly or his agent, so take that with a grain of salt. I don't think there is much credibility to these rumors, if I'm going to be honest, but let's say this instance the Mavs really want Lauri and Lauri himself is wanting to sign there as well. Well, this actually gives the Bulls a lot of leverage to work out a sign and trade, because it puts them in a position to say, hey, if you want Lauri, well, we're going to have to match any offer that you give. So if you really want him, you're going to have to give us something in return. Now, I still can't figure out how Markkanen on that roster with Dallas Mavericks fits in any way, and why he would even want that either. They already have a very capable offensive team. But like the Bulls, where they lack is defense, and like the Bulls, they already have a stretch four big man in Kristaps Porzingis, who really just wouldn't fit well at all with Markkanen next to him. In this instance, Markkanen would have to come off the bench, which we all know Lauri doesn't want to do, since he said on multiple occasions he feels he's a starter in this league. But in any event, let's say the Mavs see some potential in Lauri. And of course, there have been rumors that they have been, souring on Kristaps Porzingis recently, and it's possible they may look to move him, which for the Bulls, I personally don't want Porzingis. You're basically putting yourself into the same situation with Lauri Markkanen, although he's a better player than Lauri, but Porzingis is also on a max salary, so no thank you. But if the Mavs are looking to move on from Porzingis, then maybe Lauri is a good option for them to put alongside Luka Doncic for the future. So in this instance, I say the Bulls do a sign and trade for Jalen Brunson and Willie Cauley-Stein. Now, this trade really would be more for Jalen Brunson, the 3-year man out of Villanova, who has been a proven solid point guard in this league despite being a second-round draft pick. He wouldn't be the Bulls' point guard for the future by any means, but a solid backup point guard, which the Bulls are going to need, given I don't see them, bringing in Ryan Arcidiacono for next year, or they're fully going to guarantee Satoransky's deal coming back into the league next year. And as much as I like Devon Dotson, I don't think he's ready yet to be a full-time NBA player, and will likely get another 2-way contract to also play in the G League. Now, Cauley-Stein, this is more of an added piece to make the money work, and the Bulls, for them to take on a bad contract from the Mavs, given the Mavs are probably not really going to want to just give up Brunson. Now, if he continues to develop, in the way that he has been, that's going to make it more challenging for the Bulls to try to go after someone like Brunson. Obviously, their franchise is centered around Luka Doncic. It's not something that they're going to be considering Brunson to be a focal part of their franchise, but he's also not someone that they're going to just want to give away. So by the Bulls also taking on Cauley-Stein's contract, it's somewhat of an incentive for them to get him off the books, although Cauley-Stein will be on an expiring deal going in next season. So it's possible the Mavs might not even take that deal, unless they really, really want Lauri. But by bringing in Brunson, you add a solid point guard who has continued continue to get better every season. He's young, only 24, and his contract is cheap, so it won't affect your payroll terribly when you're going into free agency. Then Cauley-Stein, I mean, he's been a pretty big disappointment given where he was drafted into the league. You either waive him or you keep him as a backup center for Vucevic, who can give you minutes here and there. Now for this next scenario, this would be my absolute preferred, and it involves a sign and trade with the Spurs, as Markkanen has been linked to rumors with the Spurs wanting a chance at Lowry, which this makes more sense in my view, given the Spurs are in need of some offense and the fact that they don't have a ton of big men, especially with no more LaMarcus Aldridge. I see this being a much more likely scenario and destination for Markkanen than a team like the Mavs based on the need for the Spurs. So for this option, I say the Bulls do a sign and trade for Lonnie Walker. Now, I know some of you guys are probably thinking these are horrible sign and trade scenarios for the Bulls. Well, I've had a lot of you guys tell me that the Bulls need to do a sign and trade with the Spurs for DeJounte Murray. Well, yes, that would be amazing, but the fact of the matter is the Bulls don't have a ton of leverage when it comes to getting something in return for Markkanen this offseason. Teams know, well, one is that he's not worth that much, and they also know that he doesn't fit with the Bulls roster that well. So if the Bulls are asking for something ridiculous in return, then the team that they're trying to trade with is just going to laugh and say, fine, keep him. So I know some of these scenarios don't sound that great in terms of what the Bulls would be getting in return for him with a sign and trade, but it's better than getting nothing and having him walk for nothing in free agency. The fact of the matter is Markkanen's trade value is not that high, let's be honest with ourselves. So for those who are wanting DeJounte Murray or even DeMar DeRozan in return, that's not happening. One, because DeRozan is an unrestricted free agent anyway, and Murray the Spurs really value, which is why they gave him a big contract. But for Lonnie Walker, I think this is the most realistic option and still gives the Bulls something, a young piece anyway, that I still believe has potential in return. A piece that hasn't really fit well with the Spurs, as much as they had expected of him being their first round draft pick from 2018. And although Lonnie Walker has improved since his rookie season, he has still struggled to be an efficient player. But what I like about Lonnie Walker is that, well, one, he's still young, only 22, and does have the possibility to break out into being a great player. And despite his issues being efficient on offense, he has gotten better in that regard, and he's actually gotten better on the defensive end as well, which is something that the Bulls need. And I think, it's worth taking the risk on a 22-year-old player who does still have potential. And again, it doesn't hamstring the Bulls in terms of their overall salary cap, given how low his contract is being on his rookie deal. And if it doesn't work out, you don't extend him. Again, still better than losing Lowry for nothing. And then the final sign and trade scenario that I would be okay with is with the New York Knicks. Yes, the Knicks, and that's because the Knicks, although a good team, a strong hustle team, and the best defensive team in the league, but they're also one of the worst teams on offense. And despite the fact that you would think, why on earth would Tibbs want someone like Lauri Markkanen who doesn't hustle on defense and is really a liability on defense? Well, the fact of the matter is, as great as the Knicks are on defense, they are not going to be a successful team, a contending team, if they don't add some key offensive pieces, which Lauri Markkanen might be able to provide. The problem is him and Randall play the same position. However, I think Randall, he's a pretty versatile player. He can play the 3 or the 4 and even potentially the 5 as he has here and there. And then even Lowry himself, he's also played the 3 on occasion this season and actually did fairly well in that role. So a sign and trade to the Knicks could be what New York is looking for. The question is, what could the Bulls get for him in return through a sign and trade? Well, the Knicks have a ton of expiring contracts, so a lot of it depends on who they choose to extend or not. But there are a couple options I could see potentially working. Now, there's Obi Toppin and Kevin Knox, who are still on their rookie deals, but to be honest, I don't want to have any part in either of those guys. If I had to choose between one of them, I'd probably pick Obi Toppin because I do like his aggression and overall athleticism, but his defense is probably even worse than someone like Lauri Markkanen, so it doesn't really help the Bulls in that regard. And I think most of the league has just accepted that Kevin Knox has been a bust at this point, and the Knicks aren't going to move away from RJ Barrett or Emmanuel quickly. But what they may consider in a trade for Lauri Markkanen is Mitchell Robinson, a young solid center who was drafted in the 2nd round, but was actually a top 10 recruit coming out of high school and would be a great backup center to Nikola Vucevic with strong defense, a great shot blocker and rim protector, strong on the boards, especially on the offensive end. He's only 23, has improved greatly since entering the league, and has exceeded expectations from where he was drafted. Now, his salary alone likely wouldn't work, so you might have to include someone like Knox, an expiring contract, in this to make the money work, which I guess isn't terrible considering it's possible Knox is, for him, he just needs a new environment, a new situation to get the most out of him. He's still young, was a top 10 lottery pick, and again, it would be an expiring contract anyway, and the Bulls can choose just not to re-sign him going into next offseason. And it's also an incentive for the Knicks, as they're probably looking to get Knox off their books as it is, and might be willing to part ways with someone like Mitchell Robinson, who's performed very well for them, if it means they get Lauri Markkanen in return and get rid of Kevin Knox's contract as well. Now, if I'm going to be honest, none of these scenarios are really that great. And that's because the Bulls are most likely going to find themselves in a situation where they will either get minimal return for Lauri since they don't have a ton of leverage, or he just walks in free agency for nothing. Of course, there is still a remote possibility that the Bulls do re-sign him for a reasonable amount if in fact the market just isn't that great for Markkanen. But by the time free agency rolls around, I think we'll get a better understanding of what's the going rate for Lauri, and that'll really determine how the Bulls are going to position this going forward. But I want to know what you guys think, though. What do you think the Bulls should realistically do with Lauri Markkanen? Hold on to him, find a sign and trade partner. Which scenario do you think makes the most sense for the Bulls? Let me know in the comments, and as always, guys, be sure to subscribe if you're a Bulls fan, as I do post daily Bulls content. Thanks again for tuning in, and I will catch you guys in the next one.